All right, let's get started. Hi, my name is Melissa Zuro. I'm the marketing director at Warescape, and I'd like to welcome you to today's webinar, exploring different levels of automation for data-driven success. Agility and efficiency are crucial for turning data into actionable insights. So we're going to cover how automation across areas like integration, testing, visualization can transform your BI processes, streamline workflows, and enhance data quality. I'd like to introduce our speaker, Raphael Bronger, Principal Consultant of Data and Analytics at IT-Logix. Raphael brings amazing expertise in helping organizations develop and implement effective data and analytics strategies. His background is diverse. He's a strategist, he's an architect, requirements engineer, agile coach, developer, has a really well-rounded perspective on every project he undertakes. He's also the author of How to Succeed with Agile Business Intelligence, insights that will be included in today's presentation. Before we get started, just want to cover some housekeeping items. There's an icon at the bottom of the screen, an QA icon. Feel free to drop in any questions throughout the session, and we'll have time at the end to answer everything. With that being said, let's dive into our session. Raphael, over to you.
Thanks, Melissa. Hello, everybody. Welcome also from my side to this very interesting topic, exploring different levels of automation for data-driven success. So what I have prepared for you is, first of all, I would like to explain a little bit why do we need automation at all in the context of business intelligence and data warehousing. And then we're going to look into different types of automation. First of all, data warehouse automation. We'll also quickly touch on test automation, deployment automation, and even visualization automation. And to close up, give a quick summary and an outlook, thinking about what the role of AI will play in this context. And of course, I've put together a whole bunch of links for you where to find further information, because we can't touch everything in details today. So let's start. Why do we need automation? That's not about automation, that's just about me. Here you see the book cover, but I leave that for the handout, so quickly go here. So here we are, why we need automation. So before I answer this question, I would like to present to you a little city map and inviting you to follow me on a short city trip. And this city is called Agile BI City. It's part of the book as well. And in this city, you will find a lot of things you can visit, and all the topics are, or all the monuments you can go and see are around agile or agility in the BI context. So today, we're going to focus on two areas. And the first area we're going to visit is downtown patterns. In downtown patterns, you can learn a lot about standardization. And the other area we're going to look at is close by. It's central technology. And as you can see here already, here we talk or we can visit various stations about data warehouse automation, test automation, deployment automation, and visualization automation. So you see, there is a link between the topics we're going to talk today and, of course, the Agile BI City map. So first of all, now the question back, why do we need automation? I'm going to explain, or you're going to quickly understand why standards, like here in downtown patterns, and automation, like here in central technology, are so crucial. I'm often asked if I'm in the role of an agile coach, Raphael, what can I do to increase agility? And the problem with agility is that you cannot push a red button to go and make agility going up. The only thing agility is more, it's more intangible. So you feel it, or you have kind of a sense, okay, we have now a certain agility, but this basically comes from that we can release new and changed functionality in a BI or data warehousing system more frequently. Of course, if I have a new requirement and if I have to wait, let's say 6 months until I get this new requirement into production, that probably is not the sense of agility you might have. On the other hand, if we maybe can release new functionality even every 3 months or even in a shorter time frame, maybe every month or even every week, suddenly your business people which have certain requirements, they will feel, okay, that agility, I can bring in a new idea and maybe 2 weeks later I get a first result, or I can even see a first result after 1 week, then I maybe can fine-tune the direction of the finalization of it, etc. So what's the foundation of having frequent releases? Of course, we need short development iterations. So as I mentioned before, in an agile context, we typically work in 2 weeks or even 1 week iterations. And the question I asked myself when I started to work in an agile way is, how the heck can we really develop like these increments, like getting some data from a source system, transform it through a data platform, through maybe different layers, up until having a report in a time frame like 1 week or even 2 weeks? And the answer is pretty simple. Without automation, it's not possible. That's why in order to enable short iterations, we need to automate as many processes as possible. Now, on the other hand, we can now ask, but what exactly enables automation? And this is where the standardization comes into play. So let me jump on to the next slide. So standardization is built on design standards. So imagine you want to build, for example, a data pipeline which integrates or brings data from one source system into the data warehouse system, and maybe does something like delete detection. So to figure out, is there or are there records which were deleted in the source system, which I have integrated already or loaded into the system maybe a day before? And of course, there are various ways how you can do that. But if you want to automate this process so that you don't need to program that yourself, of course, you need to standardize and limit yourself to a certain way to do that. And this is where the agility paradox comes into play. And the paradox is like this: the more agility is desired in the developed results, so for example, here the outcomes of this process, the less agility can be allowed in the development process itself, requiring increased standardization and automation. So it sounds a bit weird to say, okay, we need heavy standardization, so we limit our options in order to achieve a higher agility. But I hope I could convince you with this short introduction that these two things go hand in hand. So to summarize, we see we need standardization and we need automation in order to enable short iterations, which again help us to get frequent releases of new and changed functionality. And this is what is finally perceived by your stakeholders as what they might call agility. Now, given that primer of why is automation important, let's have a look what we can automate in the context of business intelligence. So let's have a closer look at our Agile BI city map. So the first thing we're gonna visit now is the area here around data warehouse automation. So this is where we talk about automating the backend development of a data solution, be it a data warehouse or a data lakehouse. At this point, this doesn't matter. It's just about providing, let's say, the necessary data pipelining, etc., to integrate the data on one specific platform, for example. So let's have a look at this. Before we deep dive, in order to, okay, what are the levels of automation, we need to understand what are the tasks I need to do as a, for example, as a developer in this area. So let's have a look what we're going to do. So the basic idea is that we want to transfer data from a source structure, typically then even multiple source systems, into an analytical target data model. So I have illustrated that here very quickly. So you see, I just zoom in here a little bit. So these are for more or less random source tables. So this is from a medical perspective, for example, where we have patient data and some diagnostical data. So that's the point here. And these source tables we want to bring into a target data model. Here, a typical star schema, you might be familiar with this term as well, where we see we have dimensions. So here, a patient dimension, we have a diagnosis dimension, and we have a fact. So here in the fact, we really measure how many diagnoses for which patient we have. So we want to transform this data from that model into that model. And this is what we typically do through an ETL or ELT process. So ETL stands for extraction, transform, transformation, and load. And it's the same thing for ELT, just a little bit different from the order. So you typically now today, you extract the data first, then you load it into a target platform. So for example, Microsoft Fabric, and then you do the transformation on the data. Now, what are the, let's say, the necessary steps to do so? So in a abstract view here, so first of all, we need to create some tables, and then we need to load and transform the data. So we do the data type mapping, we need to do null handling, we have historization and change detection. So for example, if a patient record changed, maybe the address or any other specific thing. I already mentioned the delete detection, or of course we need to deal with errors which can come up. And then where it gets more interesting basically is about the business logic. So what records do I actually have to copy into, for example, the fact table, which ones I have to filter away because they're test data or whatever. So there is a lot of logic we might have to implement. And then we continue with the testing process. We have two kinds of testings. So first of all, I, as a human being, need to do some exploratory testing. But on the other hand, on exploratory testing means I just have a look at the system. I exploratively click here, click there, maybe follow even a test script, but I'll just double check whether it works as expected. On the other hand, a day later or 2 days later or even 2 weeks later, the system was further developed. And of course, I want to make sure that the things which I have tested 2 weeks ago are still working in the correct way. And this is where the regression testing comes into play. So I want to make sure that things work still in the same way, as long, of course, as I haven't intended to change it really. Then I need to create a documentation, or I want to look up the lineage. So for example, I want to know from which source table is or stems the data here in this dimension, for example. And step number 5 here, we have to think about the deployment, especially if we have this, for example, 3 system landscape where we have a development, a test, and a production system or workspace. And last but not least, I need to provide maybe some training to power users, to end users, etc. So that's basically what I need to do. And you see, there are 3 things which are highlighted in bold. And these are the only 3 things which are tasks where you really need to, let's say, input context or domain-specific knowledge. So that's nothing, or the business logic, for example, you cannot tremendously automate. You need to know how to calculate your key figures, etc. Or for the exploratory testing, you need to have a certain idea how the result should look like in order to compare it with the actual result. The same with training. Of course, you can even maybe automate that to a little bit. I still prefer have a human being explaining to me how things works, answer to questions, etc. Everything else, which is not bold, can be or has the high potential of being automated because it's always handled in the same way. So data type mapping doesn't care whether it's patient data or whether it's financial data or whether it is something else. The same for null handling, historization, etc. Even regression testing, it's a mechanical step basically. And you see there is a huge potential to save time and money by automating what is not bold, so that you as a developer, for example, can focus really on the added value steps or on the steps where you can add value with your work. And just as an anecdote, you see here on the right-hand side, how does this look like in practice? So I write some DDLs, so that's the language to create tables. I write SQL perhaps to query some data. Then I need to customize the DDL. I write another SQL statement, etc., etc. Then maybe I'm clever enough to say, okay, now I need to test. So I write and execute new tests to double check whether this really works what I wanted. Then I write some other SQL. Then I run my old test if there is some time left, but perhaps it's just already evening and I just want to go home. I don't invest some more time in testing. Then I start the next morning with some other SQL writing. Now, definitely I forgot to run the new test again. Documentation is postponed until later. Then I have to write the deployment scripts and I have to do the end user training. And during that, perhaps you realize that the requirements have already changed again. Maybe some of you, or for some of you, this sounds familiar. So now how can we address this challenge of having a lot of manual work? Before we can look at the technical solutions, I want to make you aware of a conceptual thing. I also outlined that in my book. It's basically that we need to switch from imperative to declarative programming. And I try to summarize that for you very briefly. So imperative programming is where you write the SQL code or the Python code or the PowerShell code, it doesn't matter, and you tell the system what to do. So you say, okay, do let's say a query here, compare the data to the data in the source system, etc. So you really write the executable code directly. On the other hand, there is a kind of programming which is called declarative programming. So you simply say or you declare what the system should achieve. And then the system writes for you the SQL, the Python, or the PowerShell code for you based on a certain pattern. And this is an important difference between these two types to understand how automation in the BI space works. And I brought along here now a first example of Warescape because declarative instructions are captured in the form of metadata. So if I see here on the left-hand side, so this is the object browser of Warescape Red. And what you can already see, I do not only have a generic table format here, but I have now in that case data warehouse specific object types. So for example, you see here again, I have the dimension category. And with the entry of adding, or by adding an entry like here, I add a dim customer, the system, I declare to the system, I want to have a dimension called dim customer. And later on, I then of course can define, okay, and it should get the data from this and this source tables, for example. So this is what I mean with you declare something the system should achieve. In that case, I tell the system, okay, I want to achieve to get a dim customer, and then Warescape stores that information in form of metadata. And the metadata again is simple database, for example, where you have this information stored in. And now let's have a look at the first level of automation here. Data automation level number 1. This is about generating executable code. And this is where tool Warescape Red comes into play. So again, the same picture as before. We see the metadata on the left hand. And now we have the code generated. So that's typically a template in Warescape. And here you see the template consists of static text. Now here it's an example of creating a view on top of the dimension, for example. So we have create view, for example. And then we have here this kind of, maybe I can scroll in a little bit. Here you see parameters or placeholders. And these placeholders, they refer to the metadata. So what Wordscape provides you with are various templates for different tasks and languages. So for example, for creating objects, but also for creating data transformation pipelines, etc., where you specify the business logic in the metadata. And then this is transformed to whatever language your target platform needs. So traditionally coming more from, for example, SQL Server or Oracle databases, mainly that what we needed as a generated language was SQL. Now moving more and more into the cloud, like Microsoft Fabric, etc., the instructions are written more and more in PowerShell, maybe including some SQL statements. So the metadata is still exactly the same, but the templates, like the code generator, adapts, of course, or needs to be adapted to the corresponding platform. And the outcome here is that you, in the end, finally get the final, now in this simple example, SQL statement where you have drop view if exists with the concrete name and of the object I do. So I don't need to write this code anymore, but it's generated based on the declarative metadata which I entered in Wordscape Red. And of course, this is then deployed to the target database. Now let's have a look at how does a data pipeline looks like, or what are the steps we need to take. I won't go into the details of the steps, so you even don't need to be able to read that or these steps all in detail. But what you can see here on the left-hand side, we have the source system. And then we have various steps from a load table through different views. Here we have the delete detection, for example, I mentioned before. Then the data is loaded into a persistent staging table. And on top of that, we have, let's say, the transformations or various transformations until the data is finally loaded in my customer dimension here on the right-hand side. And the interesting part is by defining that I would need or want to have a dim customer, or here to add a certain table into the system, I don't need to care myself how the code of each object is generated. But as long as I only work with this data automation level 1, I'm still in charge as a developer to go into Wordscape Red and say, okay, hey, I need to have a load table here. I need to have a view here, yet another view, yet another view. So I have to define these different steps. And of course, depending on how you want to develop your data pipeline, the steps might look a little bit different in your case. But in my case, this is my pattern I always want to follow. And of course, if I have a second dimension, like here the product dimension, then this is repeated. So it looks similar. Now, in that case, this dimension is based on 2 source tables, obviously, but the basic pattern is always the same. And of course, there is still a lot of repetitive work involved, even though you don't generate any line of executable code anymore on your own, but you still need to manually define the metadata. So what is the next logical step here? Of course, it's automating the generation of metadata. And this is exactly automation level number 2. And this is where Wordscape 3D comes into play. So with Wordscape 3D, we can model the data, and we can also do what we call model or metadata conversions. So what we see here again in Wordscape 3D, we read the metadata of source systems, for example. And on the other hand, we define how does the target data model should look like. And we enter this target model as it's also some kind of metadata again. So we have metadata from source systems. We have the metadata in form of the target model. And what we need now are metadata conversion or conversion rules, which help us to transform this metadata to exactly derive what we have seen on the slide before, to, let's say, generate this flow of data with the various objects, the various tables and views which build on each other. So this is basically how the data needs to be processed. And this can be derived from this metadata and this metadata. And then we can export that into Warescape Red. And so we can say 3D generates the metadata, which then is used in Red to generate the executable code. And to make that a bit more tangible for you, let me switch to this quick demonstration here. I let this run here. So I'll comment a little bit while my video plays. So here we add a new increment, so a new part of the model. So we drag in the source tables. So this is the source metadata we have already imported. We're going to set a few attributes like what are my keys. So in that case, I need to define the primary or business key of every table. And now a first step is already that I have to prepare the model, maybe to add a few additional information, which is always the same, so I can automate that. And now the next thing is that I need to create what we call a logical model. So I now want to derive the load and staging. And you see, I think it's about, now in our pattern we provide from IT-Logix, we have around 100 steps in order to, for example, automatically generate a delete detection, incremental loads, etc. So I'll let you see. So just based on what we have seen in the source, so we have two source tables, and even though we don't go into the details here, you see it generated all the necessary tables, and they are also linked to each other. So we have a certain lineage. You see here, for example, we got some error tables, we got some different kind of views here. So this was all automatically created within 3D. Now the next step is that we need to prepare that model for Red and make it specific for a certain source or target system. So of course, let me switch back quickly here. So before we export to Red, of course, now, so in the first instances, the models are independent of your target database. So the data types, for example, are generic data types. And at some point, you need to decide, oh, now I want to deploy that to my Fabric instance, or I want to deploy that to my Teradata system or to my Exasol system. And all these systems, they have similar data types usually, but also some nasty differences in between. And this is this step of preparing the model for a specific platform and then export it to Red. What you see next here is now the metadata gets imported into Warescape Red. So this is basically a deployment application, which we also need for the dev, test, and prod process, but we also use it to import the first version. And now you see, if we do here the refresh, we see now we got all the different objects of our pipeline, and now we are just adding that into a job so that we can schedule the execution of it. And finally, we are done with, here we do some final tuning. And now we start the job. And we have the rows already loaded. So, and even if we would have looked at this video in simple and not double speed, we would have used maybe 2 minutes more in order to get connected the data from two source tables and load that at least into the persistent stage here. And this is, I think, or showing the power of automation if we use that with Warescape 3D. So we really can generate the whole ELT data flow based on what we would like to see in our system. No, that we have already seen. There is even a third level of automation. You have seen before in the demo, we had to create, or we had to click several times. We had the first step where we did this prepare conversion rules. We had then to create the logical model. We had to make it specifically or prepare it for the specific target platform. We had to export it to Red. We had to import it into Red. And these steps can even be further automated. And this is something you can do in Warescape 3D through workflows. And in the workflows areas, you can define your own kind of buttons, I would say, and then you can add a script behind it so that when you press this button, it's automatically executing this, for example, 3 steps like getting data from or converting the model from the source model to the logical, from the logic to the physical model to Red metadata. And this is even a third layer of automation to speed up your development process. And again, you remember my introduction about standardization is the key for automation. Of course, you need to define in your environment, in your organization, okay, what are the steps we need to take? But once you have that standardized, it's very easy with tools like Warescape to automate that and gain tremendous speed of development. And suddenly, it's not that impossible anymore to develop a system and let's say in 1 week iterations where you have 1 week to get data from a source system, bring it into a staging area, bring it into your data warehouse, and even have enough time remaining to build a report on top of it. Good. That's it about the 3 levels of automation in the backend development. But how about testing? Would you actually buy a car with a very powerful engine without brakes and airbags? Probably not. And it's the same for if you buy a very powerful engine or car with an engine like Warescape, you probably better also automate the testing because you can gain tremendous speed, as we have seen before, but you also need to keep up with your testing process. And this is where automated testing comes into play. So I always call this as well with my team, this is professional laziness. I don't want to write a test case for every single table I create in my data warehouse. And there is a specific tool called BigEval. And this BigEval, of course, it can automate test case or execution, but it shouldn't only do or automate the test case execution. I really want to automate the test case creation. And this is how it looks like. BigEval works very closely with the metadata of Warescape Red. So I can read from the metadata repository of Warescape. For example, I have not only 1 dimension, but I have here 3 dimensions, for example. And then I define a test case, which is a parameterized test case, which again is executed, and this is down here, for every. Now, in my example, test case, or in my example, it's for dimensions. So for every dimension BigEval finds in the metadata of Warescape, it will run the test case and do some dimension-specific testing. So for example, checking if the timeline or the historization is correct, etc. And this is the thing which is really powerful if you can connect your data test automation with the metadata of the data warehouse automation tool like Warescape. And again, I did evaluations of several tools, and so far I haven't found a tool which is capable of reading this kind of metadata and creating the test cases in that flexibility as we see it here illustrated. That's why my recommendation is really have a close look, especially if you have Warescape. There are also plenty of predefined packages for Warescape, which you can get within the BigEval context. Also to mention, I have that link on the final slide as well. We did a Warescape webinar, I think 2 years ago or 1 year ago, I'm not sure anymore, together with Big Eval. So there you could find more information and the live demo as well, how this works in more details. Here is a screenshot example. So here on the left-hand side, you see here we are reading the metadata. So here we are reading the object list from Warescape. We set a few parameters, and on the left-hand side here, you see the actual test case. So here we have, now in that case, it's a SQL statement, which is parameterized. So this is similar to the template you saw before. So again, we mix the metadata on one end and then use that metadata in the executable code. Then next thing is deployment automation. So now we have developed everything in an automated way. We have tested it in an automated way, but we also typically have thing like 3 system landscapes. So we need to deploy things from a development environment to a test and to a production environment. And of course, you can do that manually, but then you need to write quite a bit of scripts in order, for example, to detect what tables are already available in the target system, because within a data warehouse, perhaps you don't want just to drop the table and recreate the table. So there are a lot of things you need to keep in mind when doing or writing a deployment script. And one thing about deployment automation is already included in Warescape Red, and some others we can add with regular continuous integration and deployment platforms. So I quickly show one slide to illustrate how this process could look like. We also had a Warescape user group where we went to or looked into that process in some more detail. But what you can see here is in the development environment, we work with Warescape Red typically. And maybe you remember in the video before there was this blue screen, or not a blue screen, but the tool with this blue layout where we imported the metadata into Warescape Red. And in the same way, you can also export data from Warescape Red. And the intermediate format is a deployment application or a set of WST files. And if we now look at the right-hand side, we have, for example, an integration environment or test environment. We have a user acceptance environment, and we have a production environment. So here we even have a 4-system landscape. And I won't go into the technical details, but we can see here, we can combine the power of Warescape with a platform like Azure DevOps and, for example, Git as a repository. And then, let's say, use pipelines here to prepare the deployment and to actually deploy automatically what we had in dev or in a certain set of objects we want to deploy, and deploy that automatically to a testing environment. We can also combine this with Big Eval in order to automatically launch the test runs to make sure everything was deployed in the correct way or loaded in the correct way. And we have a similar process here, which is more a release pipeline then. So this is a completely automated part. And if you want to go, for example, to a UAT environment or a target environment, the prod environment, sorry, then we maybe want to have some more manual check steps or checkups where we have a human interaction before we actually release something into the UAT or production environment. And again, this is something which again speeds up not the development, but really the deployment process. And again, in the overall time you need to get something from requirements into the production system, this is another step to increase, let's say, or to reduce the cycle time, the iteration time you need to get something up and running in production. So we are coming to an end of our short city trip and the visit of Central Technology. So last station we're going to visit today is visualization automation. Not sure if you have ever heard of that term, but it's basically the same thing as with all the things before. We need a certain standard, and based on a standard, we can automate. And I would like to explain that. The standardization when it comes to visualization are so-called notation standards. And the most common set of standards, and soon it's becoming even an ISO standard, are the International Business Communication Standards, or in short, IBCS. I'm gonna illustrate that quickly afterwards. What does this look like? But short mentioning here is based on the IBCS as a conceptual thing. There are plenty of tools out there which help you create meaningful charts and as well tables in an automated way, because the standards defines how certain elements should look like. So a software vendor, like the three I've brought along here, give you a few examples. They, let's say, automatically know how to display this data. And I would like to show you a quick demonstration here as well. So there is a little video. So this is a pretty new tool from Zebra AI. So that's the Zebra BI company behind it. But now, of course, everybody is playing around or providing things based on AI. Now, in that case, what's happening here is I connected my data, or the tool connected to, now in that case, is a Power BI data set, or in the demo, it was an Excel spreadsheet. And this was now generated automatically by the tool. And besides that, it's also analyzed the data here in a certain way. I would like to give you a few ideas about the notation standard. Why was it displayed exactly in that way? Let me zoom into that. So the IBCS notation standard, for example, defines that the current period, or the values of the current or actual period, should always be displayed in a solid dark color. It doesn't have to be the black as you see here. It could also be solid dark blue, for example. But in that case, it's the, let's say, the typical thing is solid dark here in the black. So I immediately know, even without looking at the label there, that this must be the actual values. On the other hand, I see a solid light line, so the gray line here, and I automatically know, because that's defined in the standard, that solid light always means a previous year period or a previous period. It's also defined in the standard that we want to show the data labels, and that the data labels should be at maximum 4 digits. Now here we even have only 2 digits. Down here we see, for example, we have a maximum of 4 digits. So typically with 1 decimal place. And because there is a standard which defines how such a chart should look like, it can be generated pretty much automatically. The same is here. There is a definition how these deviations should look like. There is also a definition that we can highlight certain things with the blue color, for example. So a lot of little details which help you to automatically create. Now here with Zebra AI, for example, it's really done even the analysis for you. But the typical add-ins for Power BI or Tableau, they just give you a very easy way to create such a chart by dragging in, let's say, okay, I want to visualize this measure. I want to see it by months or by this category, etc. So I think you got the idea that having a standard like IBCS enables you to automate the visualization. And if you even combine that with a large language model, you can do even much more on the analysis of the data itself. So let me get to the summary, outlook, and where to find further information so that we have enough time for your questions. So I hope I could bring across automation is key. If you get one thing out of this webinar, this is the key phrase you should remember. Automation is key for being faster. I hope I could prove that to you by showing you how easy it was to generate a whole data pipeline from within Warescape 3D, which generates the metadata, and then generating the executable code on the Warescape red side. The other thing which I think is as important as just being faster, think about a team where you have even just 2, sometimes 5, sometimes 10 developers. And everybody is working on the same object type. So everybody is maybe creating a dimension object a day or something like this. Having automation in place, you are not only faster, but you're also receiving a defined and hopefully a better and especially a consistent quality, because everything which is generated in the same way and is independent on the individual developer. And I think this is a huge benefit as well for larger organizations, that you can define your patterns or design patterns once, and then you can put that into the definition of, for example, the code generation, or in Warescape 3D into these model conversion rules. I also want to show you that automation is not only about data warehouse automation, but that you need to always have the big picture. If you are just automating the data warehouse development, but don't automate the test automation or the testing process, this can become dangerous. So you should always have in mind, okay, if we automate data warehouse automation, you should think about earlier or later, at least, about test automation. You can think about the deployment automation. And if you want to speed up the report creation process as well, which I think is a rather important step in order to show the value, bring it to the end user, you should also think about visualization automation, as just demoed before. Now, as a quick outlook, of course, I can't do a webinar nowadays without mentioning AI at least once. And especially now, I mean, since 2 years, most people think AI is just ChatGPT. Of course, AI is much more than just large language models used in ChatGPT. But of course, this is a new aspect we haven't known in that, at least not in the public, in that to that amount. So one issue, what we have with large language models, they are non-deterministic. So whenever you ask ChatGPT something, it might answer in a slightly different or completely different way, depending on your prompt. And we played at IT-Logix, we played around with large language models and code generation quite a bit. And it's rather difficult to use them for the level 1 automation, especially if you want to make sure, as I mentioned on the last slide, this code consistency. So if you generate the executable code like SQL or PowerShell, you will always get a different result, even if it achieves the same thing. But depending on how you prompt, and even if you just reuse the same prompt, it can be that the code which you get is a bit different. And this is actually, even though this is also a form of automation, it's not a desired thing to always generate a slightly different piece of code. That's why we shouldn't use perhaps AI or a chatbot like ChatGPT to create the executable code directly in your BI system. But you can use AI in the context of creating the automation routines. So if you want to write the template, because typically you have a single template for loading a dimension table. You have a single template for loading whatever stage table, or you have a single template to define a specific view type. So here now AI, of course, is of tremendous help when it's about writing the templates or just defining how should the default design pattern look like. And then you put that into the template. And again, the template then makes sure that you generate the same code every time you use that specific template. So just that to be said, AI definitely is of great help as well in data warehouse and testing automation, but use it in the right way and be sure to make sure or be aware of the non-deterministic nature of especially large language models. So this is the promised slide where you find the link. So you will get the PDF of this slide. So you don't need to write down all these links, of course. You can basically just click on them. So we have here, if you want to learn more about this topic, you can read on that now, especially in chapter 8 of the book, How to Succeed with Agile Business Intelligence. And in this book, of course, you will find the description of all the other city districts of Agile BI City, and a lot of explanations around that. Then, of course, if you are not yet familiar with Warescape, I highly recommend visiting their website. You can also easily book a demo, because even though that's not Warescape's slogan, but seeing is believing. So for me, 10 years ago, when I first saw Warescape, this was really a wow effect. And I'm still a real fan of Warescape, helping me in my everyday life. I also mentioned BigEval. I mentioned the webinar, but also have a look at their website, bigeval.com. And there is a gallery. I have linked that here, where you can find predefined test packs to test Warescape Red. You will find Zebra AI as well. And if you want to learn more on IT-Logix, the company I work for, you will find the link here. On the right-hand side, you'll find a lot of opportunities in the upcoming weeks where you can get more information, both on Warescape. Here, for example, next is October 22nd, migrating data warehouses to the cloud. Then that's a local event in the DACH area, so in Zurich, but as well some German cities. There is the Data Analytics Barcamp, where I will attend and host the Barcamp in Zurich. The day after, we have yet another conference in Zurich. So this is a full day event where my colleague Elgar Brunot will show how Warescape works in combination with Microsoft Fabric. We have yet another webinar, I guess, using the data warehouse to ensure quality and trust in analytic systems. We have an online meetup with the Warescape DACH user group. And in November 12th till 14th, we have the data days, where you can learn more about, let's say, not only Warescape, but how Warescape is integrated on and collaborating with the other tools from Idera. So highly recommended to visit one or the other event mentioning here. That's it. I have my last slide for you. Are you still coding yourself, or do you let automation do the work for you? Now it's up to you to ask questions. Are there any questions for me? Maybe Melissa, do you have them on your screen?
Yes, there's a couple of questions did come in. The first one is, how do you prioritize which aspects of the BI process to automate first, and what factors influence that decision?
So good question. Even though maybe you from a Warescape perspective don't like the answer, I say if you are short on budget, start with the test automation, because that's your safety belt. And on the other hand, of course, if you have test automation, the second most important thing is definitely the data warehouse automation. It's a bit dangerous if you start with the data warehouse automation and don't afford the test automation. So my recommendation, of course, is get those two in a first instance, because they work together very close. So they are basically two sides or of a coin. So that's definitely the thing. Then deployment automation is typically coming into a project after the first or second release, when people start noticing, okay, now we can really develop in a fast pace. We can also test in a fast pace, but we are struggling with deployments. So this is then the third possibility. And the data visualization automation, that's basically something you can do all the time, but is rather independent on the other three levels or types of automation.
Fantastic. A next question that came in is, can you share an example of how test automation has directly improved the quality and reliability of your BI data?
Yeah, there are plenty of example. Let me think about a most appealing one. So I mean, basically, even just having a row count check so that we check whether the number of rows, let's say, of number of customers, which we have in our source system, corresponds to the number of customers we have in our data warehouse. It's a very simple or simplistic example, but even just to get that information or to know that this is tested after every load, this let me sleep much better because I know when there is a difference, even with such a simple thing, I'm notified before my end user or even my project sponsor is. So it's really about these sometimes small things, but you also have large things. So one example was there was a system where we had currency conversion, and one of the controllers in the company wanted to adjust the conversion rate, and he made a typo, I guess, something like this, and suddenly everything was multiplied not by 1.1 from Swiss francs to euro, for example, but it was multiplied by 100.1. So all the figures were completely crap. And this, of course, was detected by the test automation. So we could figure out or debug that and figure out, oh, it's just a typo in the conversion rate. And so this was a lifesaver, I would say.
Yeah, we have one more question that came in. If anyone else has any other questions, feel free to pop it into the Q&A section of down below of the Zoom. What challenges have you faced when implementing automation and data integration or visualization, and how can you overcome them?
I mean, automation doesn't solve the problem that stakeholders, where you get from whom you get the requirements, often do not have an idea or a clear idea what they actually need. And automation doesn't solve that directly. But where automation helps with this challenge is that you can provide a first result, a first idea how this could look like, what the data is looking like in a much faster way. So if we have, for example, a requirements engineering meeting in the morning, we can already deliver first insights in the late afternoon because we are so fast by getting the data, pushing it through the data platform up into a first report. So we can provide a feedback loop to the end users or stakeholders much more faster, and therefore also learn in a higher speed what they actually would like. Because typically stakeholders need to see a first result to tell you what they do not like about it. And then we can narrow it down, what actually do they need. So that still remains the biggest issue, even if you have automation in place. But it definitely helps to tackle that.
Wonderful. That's the last question that we have. Raphael, thank you so much for this presentation. Your expertise is phenomenal. Lots to think about. I love the practical examples, the strategies. So this was a really wonderful session. And thank you
Thank you,
for everyone
Melissa.
for absolutely. Yeah. And thank you everyone for joining. Any questions, reach out to marketing@warescape.com. You'll receive the recording and slides in the next day or two. Thank you so much. Have a great day, everybody.
Have a nice day. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.